Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the chapter on motivation and emotion. I am going to pick up where the last recorded video lectures left off. And yeah, well, the last recorded video lectures left off. And I must confess that I'm recording these about a year after the previous one was recorded. So I'm a little rusty, but we left off talking about psychological motivations, self-determination, intrinsic, extrinsic motivation. And the last little bit of this chapter is about the topic of emotions. I could talk about emotions for a really long time. It's a really interesting topic to me, but I'm going to set my timer so that I don't do that. Okay, so we're going to talk about emotions from the psychological perspective. There's a couple important things to point out or to draw your attention for the purpose of, I want to make sure I'm being recorded too, for the purpose of examinations. First of all, is what we would call the functions of emotions. Emotions are thought to have a purpose, that they are to get your attention. They're a all call alert. They're simply an indication that something is going on inside you. It's thought of to be like the biological response to an environmental stimulus. From the psychological perspective, from our academic purposes, there's no such thing as a good or a bad emotions. Emotions simply are a physiological response to an environmental stimulus. So in a face-to-face class, I like to ask people if they've ever been told that they have a problem with anger or how do they feel about anger. And I will simply suggest that there's no such thing as a problem with anger. What you're probably describing is what we would call the third step. So if you look at the slide right here, you have these three elements of emotions. First of all, it's the subjective or the cognitive, the thought that you have about what is happening in the environment. So that is your subjective or your cognitive appraisal of the event. Your boss just called you into the office. How do you think about that? Are you thinking, oh, great, I'm going to get a promotion? Or are you thinking, oh, crap, I'm going to be fired? Right? The cognitive appraisal of what is going on, how you think about it. The second is the physiological reaction. So often when we think about emotions, we're limiting our interpretation to the biology. Your heart is racing, your palms are getting sweaty, your legs are getting shaky. It's your body responding. And this is not good nor bad. This is simply the physiological reaction to what you're processing in your mind. It's the third piece. When people say they have a problem with emotion or, they get too sad, what they're probably responding to or describing is they are behaving or expressing, or sometimes we call it emoting, in a way that's inappropriate. When we have problems with anger, we're usually describing how we react. You break things, you're hostile to people, you yell. So it's that third piece. But to think of emotions as simply being a physiological response to something that's happening, that's just a thing. That's neither good nor bad. The part that we have some control over, though, is the third element. A great book that I always recommend is called Emotional Agility. And she describes, her name is Susan David, and she describes the relationship between these three elements. And she says, we can learn before we act on this third step. And when we have an emotional, physiological experience, we should lean into it, or we should think about, why am I feeling this way? Be curious. Be curious about your negative or your unpleasant emotions like sadness and anger, but also be curious about your pleasant emotions like happiness and surprise. Why are you happy? Think about it. We often don't think about what is going on here that makes me happy. We think about, why am I always sad? We're curious about the unpleasant ones, but not the pleasant ones. Okay, a couple other things down here. What this image illustrates here is what's referred to as the 6 universal emotions. This idea was proposed by a guy named Eckelmann, and Eckelmann traveled the world and showed faces to people all over the world, and they all were he identified that people could almost universally recognize these six facial expressions. And so we traditionally think of, or psychology textbooks will tell you that there's six universal emotions. One that's fun to talk about is disgust, because the disgust expression is characterized by a wrinkling of the nose, and very often the tongue goes to the roof of the mouth. So if I were to, say things like, talk about dirty diapers, or mold on the back of the bologna in the back of the refrigerator, you probably would curl up your nose, kind of thing. Another thing that's mentioned down here is what's called the facial feedback hypothesis, and this is an exam question. This is a quiz question. The question is something like, does holding your face in a certain way result in you experiencing that emotion? And the answer is true, that yes, that is called the facial feedback hypothesis. And what that says is that the expression that I show on my face, I will come to experience that emotion. So if I walk around all day with a smile on my face, I'm likely to feel more positively. If I walk around with a frown and look mean, I'm likely to experience sadness. And this, interestingly enough, has actually been demonstrated amongst method actors who was the guy that played Abraham Lincoln? And Abraham Lincoln was a depressive. And so he reported feeling very sad after he would play that character. I think the same thing is with Heath Ledger, the guy that played Joker, was often also a method actor. So the facial feedback hypothesis says when I hold my face in a certain way, I will experience the feedback to my emotions, as I'll experience that sensation. This is a little fun exercise to do. It's just an illustration. Like if you sit square in the middle of your screen and you focus your eyes on the blue dot, and ask yourself which face appears to be happier, chances are it's the one on the left, because we read faces and emotions in our right hemisphere. So if you're looking square at that blue dot, just gazing at the dot, which expression, which one appears to be happier, even though they're exactly the same. Just a second ago when I was doing that, it in fact was the left. I double checked that before I cheated and read the small print. This is just an illustration of what we call the amygdala hijack. So thinking back to chapter 2, when we were talking about the brain structures and what they do, remember it's the amygdala. It's the guts of the brain. It's the mammalian brain. It's the structures, the structures on the inside. So I don't want to use frontal, middle, because that doesn't make any sense. But it's in that limbic system. Right? This is where memories are processed. But what happens is when we're processing information, and you can follow sort of these arrows here, right? You have the sensory data that goes through your eyes. It goes to your thalamus, and your thalamus is then what sends it to various structures, gets processed in your visual cortex, but it also goes to your amygdala. So very often we respond to stimulus before we've had a chance to think about it, right? Before it's gone to your cortex, right? To the part of your brain that says, oh, that's no reason to be angry, right? You've already responded. It's already sent signals to that very rapidly responding sympathetic nervous system. We'll talk more about the sympathetic nervous system in the chapter on stress, but we talked about it back in chapter 2, that the sympathetic nervous system, that's the one that responds very quickly. It's the one that feels sorry for you. It's about protecting you. So before your frontal lobe, right, your highest functioning, the highest order brain, the one that says, oh, that's nothing to be afraid of, before it's had a chance to evaluate the data, it's your sympathetic nervous system and your anger and your fear response has already kicked in. That's why we call it a hijack, right? So your body begins to react before you've thought it through. And this is where, like, Susan David's emotional agility comes in, because what she says is, we can condition ourselves, we can train ourselves to be agile in our emotional response and think them through, like kind of slow things down a little bit so that we are not emoting, we're not reacting, we're not yelling or crying or before we've had a chance to really think. I don't know about you, but I can think of it many times over the course of my life where I reacted quickly to an emotional stimulus and then regretted it and then had to have gone back after the fact and apologized. So that's really what the idea of emotional agility is all about. And I'm going to stop this one because we're coming up on 10 minutes. And the next slide I'll talk about is culture and emotions. If I can remember how to stop, stop, stop. And